Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Higher Education Tableau User Group meeting for May. We are recording, and the recording link will be sent out probably sometime next week to anyone who's registered, so you can catch up if you have to miss any parts of it today. So we are going to jump right in. We've got a lot crammed into our agenda today. But first, any announcements from the group? We invite you to come off mute. If you have any job openings or anything that you want to share, please don't hesitate to either come off mute and tell us about it or put it in the chat. Any takers?
Well, Ginny, I've got one. I've got one really for you.
Oh.
Analytics Day. Analytics Day is happening on June 10th, which is, I don't know, a month from now. Is that right?
June 2nd.
June 2nd. Sorry, less than a month from now. You should give them more details, Ginny.
Absolutely. I can also put the link in the chat in a minute. So Analytics Day is a one-day mini conference focusing on Tableau in higher education. And we put it on every June. This is our 5th one in a row. It's awesome, free virtual event. So I will, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Kathy just put the link in the chat box. So if you haven't registered and want to register, I plan to have that agenda up and running next week so you can see, you know, what kind of fabulous presentations we'll have for you. But it's always a lot of fun. Definitely encourage anyone to come. I'm also going to put the link in the chat box for the Higher Ed Slack page for open positions. If you have anything that you're hiring for and want to share that out, please don't hesitate to do that. All right, so today is all about putting the fun back in fundamentals. We're going to start with our guest. Oh, what?
The fun, man.
The fun. We're going to start with our guest speaker, Acti-FLYing, who's going to talk about the layers of data visualization. And then Roshni and I are going to go through measures, dimensions, and calcs. Oh my. And then we'll finish up with Anna's formatting basics and talk about the Tableau conference, which is coming up next week. So I'm going to introduce Ethan. Ethan is the Associate Director of Analytics Engineering at Playford Data. If you're like me, you register to get those blog posts whenever they come up because there is inevitably something very useful in every single blog post. They also do videos. It's definitely worth checking out if you're not familiar with it. He's also the co-lead of the Veterans Advocacy Tug and a member of the Tableau Speakers Bureau and a 2-time Visit the Day winner. And he's been using Tableau since 2016. So I will put these links to his Tableau Public Twitter and LinkedIn page. Yep, Roshni beat me to it in the chat. And without further ado, we'll let Ethan share his screen and get started.
All right, thanks for that, Jenny. I've never been introduced like that. That was fantastic. And I don't know about you guys, but I am pumped after the music. Let me pull up my screen here. And we'll dive in. All right. Well, before we kick things off, I do want to just say thanks for the leadership team here for the invitation. Really look forward to speaking to this group for quite a while. So I'm happy I'm here. I'm looking forward to presenting what I have today. And more importantly, I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us. I know your time is very valuable. So myself, the other presenters, as well as the leadership team, I know we really appreciate you guys joining us. Hopefully we can present something to provide you some value that you can take it away and use it in your own day-to-day. So let's go ahead and get started. Just quickly touching on myself, I don't even know if I can talk to myself as Ginny introduced me so well. My name is Acti-FLYing. I'm the Associate Director of Analytics Engineering at Playford Data. We're a consulting firm. We work with companies and organizations all over the world. I absolutely love what I do. Consulting and analytics is really exciting. I get to work with anything from nonprofits all the way up to, you know, Fortune 100 companies. So it's fantastic. I absolutely love it. She also mentioned I am a co-lead of the Veterans Advocacy Tableau User Group. So I'm a veteran myself. I served in the military. Several of us came together and created this group to really advocate for veteran-related issues. And we use Tableau as kind of our platform to do that. So there's a lot of veteran-related issues out there like suicide, homelessness, those kinds of things. And we really use Tableau to kind of partner with other veteran-related organizations and help them kind of find insight within their data. Through our tug, we also kind of teach the community through tips and tricks with Tableau and things like that, which is how I kind of presented or built out this presentation that I'm going to go through today. I'm also a member of the Tableau Speaker Bureau. That's just a really fancy way to say that I'm on probably an Excel sheet that Tableau has where they can call upon me to come speak at events like this. So if there was a need for a speaker at a Tableau user group or the conference, or maybe it's even just to talk to one of their clients that's looking to get into the software, they can pull me from that list to go and speak to those individuals or groups. All right, well, you guys didn't come here to hear about me or hear me talk about myself. So let's dive into the content itself. What I have to present today is called the 6 components of layered graphics. And this idea is kind of a framework that's been put in place that we've been using to visualize data, with computers. And Tableau has really took this idea and framework and perfected it, which makes their software very easy to use and kind of guides us through this process. So what are those 6 components of layered graphics? So the first layer is the data layer. At this data layer, if we're familiar with Tableau software, the moment we open up the software on our computer, the first thing it asks us to do is connect to data. So naturally, this is the first layer. Tableau has really perfected this. There's a ton of different data connections out there that Tableau offers within their software. So it's very easy to implement and it's very easy to go through this layer. The next layer is choosing your mark type. And when I say choose your mark type, it's really what kind of chart type do you want to encode the marks on the view with? So are you using a line chart or a bar chart, maybe a pie chart? Basically, this is that process of deciding how you want to visualize your data. Then we go into aesthetics. Aesthetics is where we're adding some pre-attentive attributes to kind of drive that insight. These would be things like adding color, size, shape. And if you notice, as we've gone through at least these first 3, it is kind of a linear process. We connect to data, we choose our mark type, we start encoding some stuff, and then we get into some more advanced things, which brings us to the 4th layer. This is where we start filtering or slicing and dicing the data up and kind of digging in and trying to find those insights that we can use to bring value to our organizations. The 5th layer is statistics, and this is where we can start bringing in some very powerful insights and tools and modeling to get into things like predictive analytics or prescriptive insights and actions that we can kind of dive in and dig out of the data. And last is the theme. So the 6th layer is theme, and this is where we're going to take all of that data that we've just visualized, and we're going to wrap it with a very professional polish to it, essentially. So this is where you're going to add some architecture into your workbook. Some design elements like things like buttons or toggles. Maybe it's adding in some design elements such as like a drop shadow that's going to add some depth to it. But really, this is going to add that professional polish and drive adoption of your tool within the organization. So before we dive into that stuff in a little bit more detail, I do want to briefly touch on the history behind the idea. So the most recent publication that I found with kind of this approach was a book written by Hadley Wickham. And he published this book, but it's also a library that you can download in R. R is a coding language that's primarily used for statistics. Within R, if you wanted to visualize data, there wasn't really a good way to do that until Hadley Wickham published this library, which takes this layering graphics approach. And now you have a really easy way to visualize data using R. Hadley Wickham, though, he actually picked up on this idea from a different author. His name was Leland Wickelson, and he authored a book called The Grammar of Graphics. You can even see that Hadley Wickham kind of tips his hat and credits this other author he named his library ggplot2 after the grammar of graphics. So it actually stands for the grammar of graphics plotting version 2 of that library. But like I mentioned earlier, this idea has been around for decades now, really back to the beginning when we first started visualizing data using computers. So when we did that, we had to manually tell the computer, this is the data that I want to connect to. This is the chart type I want to use to encode those views. And we've just over time kind of perfected this process. And like I mentioned, Tableau has really driven it to the next level and made it extremely easy for the end user to kind of go in and do this process. So let's start diving into this in a little bit more detail. The first layer I mentioned is data. And at the data layer, this one sounds pretty self-explanatory. We're just connecting to data, right? But there are some core concepts within connecting to data that I want to make sure everyone understands. The first kind of core concept is this idea between unstructured and structured data. So when I mention an unstructured data source, this is really what I'm talking about here. If we have any kind of insight into any kind of business environment, we've probably run across a spreadsheet that looks like this, where we have dates kind of going across horizontally across the top in each column. We maybe have some measures and dimensions on the left-hand side that kind of read through. You can see here we have entire columns that are colored and being used as kind of a buffer or a border between the measures and the actual data itself. So you can see there's all kinds of things wrong with this. If we were to load this into Tableau, we could probably do something with it, but it's not meant to connect to a data structure like this. We really want to get our data into a structured format, what's also known as a tidy format, you might have heard it called. A structured data source is going to look like something like this on the right. We've kind of taken that unstructured data and pivoted it. So now all the dates kind of fall into one column. We have a column for each measure and dimension. So it's very clean and easy to use. And now it's kind of ready for really any kind of computer program to kind of load in and digest very easily. When it comes to structured data, I kind of have 3 rules of thumb that I follow to kind of define what that is. The first rule of thumb is that every column is a single variable. So you can see here my simplified example, I have name, age, and gender. Each column header represents that data moving down through the data set. The second rule of thumb is that every observation is unique. So you can see here in my example, I have 4 rows. This would represent Anna, Mark, Max, and Carol. And we wouldn't want to encode Anna twice in this data set, right? That would cause a duplication, at least for this data set that we're looking at here. If we have any duplicates in our data, that's going to cause problems later down the road. So we want every observation to be unique as we flow through the data. The third rule of thumb is that all the values are filled in, right? So we don't want to have any nulls or NA values. Once we start getting into some of those deeper layers like statistics, for example, a lot of those nulls and NAs, they're going to cause issues when we start doing analysis like that. So when we talk about a structured data source, we want to make sure all that data is being captured and collected the right way. And through our ETL processes, when we're structuring it and bringing it into, say, a server or a database, we really want to make sure all that data is there and it's filled in. So there's plenty of programs out there that you can use to take your unstructured data and put it into a structured format. Tools like Alteryx or Tableau Prep, very popular. You can also code, so things like R or Python or SQL. Those are great coding languages that you can use to kind of data engineer your data from unstructured to structured. The next core concept in the data layer is the idea between measures and dimensions and how they're related with one another. So a measure would be defined as any numeric quantitative value that can be measured. So these would be things like sales or maybe some sort of aggregation like the sum of sales. Dimensions, however, are qualitative fields that describe our measures, right? So as an example, let's say I had $2 million in sales. If I were to just bring in that measure and I saw that I had $2 million, I would be feeling very good about that right now. But if I were to bring in my date dimension, and I saw last year I made $1.5 million in sales, and this year I made 500,000, I might not be feeling very well about that, right? Obviously, there's something wrong. I want to dig into that and figure out what's caused that decrease in sales year over year. So that's kind of how they're related and how they're used together. So as I go through this presentation, I've actually built a supplementary workbook in Tableau where we can toggle these layers on and off and see how they kind of work together and in some ways affect one another. So at the data layer, I've turned it on and we literally just have a blank workbook at this point. I have just made the data connection, but not done anything with it yet. The second layer is mark type. So again, like I mentioned earlier, when I meant mark type, I really mean what kind of chart type do you want to use to encode the marks in your view. So Tableau makes this really easy for us, right? So connecting to the data was very easy. Once we connect to data, we open up a sheet and we can simply just drag in measures and dimensions onto the view, and Tableau will automatically encode those marks with some sort of chart type. So you'll probably end up with a scatter plot or a bar chart or maybe a line chart, just depending on the measures and dimensions used when you drag those into the view. So very easy to create or choose a mark type. Tableau will even automatically do it for you. But if you wanted to manually select your mark type, from the marks card, you can simply click on this drop down and you have all of these options to choose from. So you can change it from line to bar or line to area chart. Anything you really wanted from this drop down is very simple to do. Tableau even took it another step forward though, and it allowed us to choose from this Show Me tab. So obviously we all work in data visualization, we're probably visual people. If you click on the Show Me tab in the top right of the authoring interface, you'll be presented with a screen that looks like this. And really Tableau's kind of done a lot of research and development on which chart types are best used to describe data. So they already know kind of the mark types and measures and dimensions and data types that you have in the view. And based on that, it will automatically kind of recommend which chart types to use. So you can click on the Show Me tab and it will build out that chart type for you without having to do all the work manually yourself. But Tableau is also a very flexible and robust tool. So there's a lot of chart types. It's almost limitless, the amount of chart types or mark types that we can use and choose to encode our marks in the view. A great resource out there that I absolutely love is this Tableau chart catalog. So it was published by Kevin Flairledge, and it has 100 chart types in here, all very unique, from 74 different authors. And if you're looking for inspiration or maybe just trying to figure out how to build some of these more advanced chart types, this is a great resource to kind of walk to and to take a look at. So you can simply scroll through here, and let's say as an example, I wanted to kind of figure out how to build an arc diagram, which is this first chart type in the view. I can simply click on that and it's going to take me to that workbook in Tableau Public where I can then download that workbook. I can get under the hood of the workbook and kind of figure out how that author, the data structure that he used, maybe how he's implemented that within the view. I can kind of re-engineer that arc diagram to figure out how to build it myself. So it kind of gives me all the tools needed to implement those things on my own. So this is a great one to go to if you're looking for inspiration or again, just trying to upskill yourself and add a couple new chart types to your tool belt. But there's also a lot of other great resources out there and he kind of credits some of them here. One of the most popular ones is the Visual Vocabulary by Andy Kriebel. He takes a different approach. So rather than presenting you with all of different chart types, Andy kind of walks through the use case first. So you would choose how you want it or the use case you're looking to visualize your data with. And then under the hood, he'll recommend which chart types would best be used for that use case. So as an example, let's say I wanted to encode correlation. So I would go to Andy Kriebel's The Visual Vocabulary. I would click on, I want to encode correlation. And underneath that, he would kind of tell me, these are the chart types that would probably best be used to visualize correlation with your data. So another great resource that kind of takes another approach to it. So that brings us to the end of layer 2. I've toggled on my mark type so we can see it kind of come to life here. The data I connected to was stock prices. So it's the close price by day. And I've chosen a line chart to encode the marks on my view. So the third layer is aesthetics. And at this layer, this is really as a Tableau developer, Tableau engineer, or a data analyst, this is really where you can start showing your chops. So anyone can really connect to data. Tableau makes that extremely easy. Drag in a couple measures and dimensions and have a bar chart. Their data is visualized. They could probably take that and do that in 5 minutes without even opening the tool for the very first time. But it really takes some finesse and some skill to encode color and these aesthetics correctly. So if we were to jump into Tableau, like I said, anyone can build a bar chart, but it takes some finesse and skill to do this. So this is really where you can start dialing in your chops and bringing value to your data visualization. So I'll kind of go through these briefly. The first one that I want to touch on is color, and color is an absolutely great way to drive attention to specific insight in your data. So if you colored everything gray and maybe drew out one with like a bright blue or maybe some sort of red, that's going to draw the user's attention to that mark immediately. So color is a great pre-attentive attribute that you can use to drive insight within your tools. There's also some other things within color that are interesting. You can change things like transparency or the opacity, which is going to kind of dial back that cognitive load that color kind of brings to the table, especially if you're working with branding that maybe has some very bright colors. You want to kind of tone that down a bit for the end user. You can also add things like borders, which gives you the ability to choose between solid lines or dashed lines and things like that. That can really be paired to kind of drive in some unique ways that you can encode marks. So just another great thing to pay attention to when you're adding color to your view. And all that can be accessed if you click on the color mark card. You'll get this menu here that you see on the left where you can change the color, you can change the opacity there, and add borders to the marks on your view. The next aesthetic is shape, and shape again is another great pre-attentive attribute that you can bring to the table to kind of draw the user's attention to specific points. Shape is another great way to add in some custom things into Tableau. So underneath the hood, you can download and upload custom shapes to Tableau, where you can directly access them from the tool itself. So in your My Tableau repository, it's in the documents file on your or documents folder on your computer. If you go to that repository, load in some shapes, you'll be able to access those shapes here and encode your marks with those custom shapes. That gives you the ability to add things like buttons or toggles and things like that that don't come out of the box within Tableau. Another great one is size. Size is awesome as a pre-attentive attribute or aesthetic, especially when paired with some of these others like shape or color. My only complaint with size is you just have this little slider to kind of adjust the size. So if you're trying to size things the exact same size, especially over multiple sheets, it's kind of hard to do that with that little slider. So that's just another tip there. The next one is aesthetics, the next one is your axes. And as an aesthetic, this one gets often overlooked, but it's a great way to add in some context to the user and very subtly as well. So if you have any kind of X or Y axes on your view, you can simply right click on that. There'll be an option to edit your axes. And from there, you'll be presented with this menu. So here we can adjust the range of our axes. We can adjust the scale. So you can simply check mark that box and it will reverse the scale. Doing that with some views gives you kind of a unique look. So that's also another great aesthetic that you can use with your axes. We also have the ability to add in titles to our axes, which again adds context to the user, and it does it very subtly. So it's another way you can kind of draw back on that data to ink ratio by adding some titles onto your X and Y axes. Also, you can reduce the amount of tick marks. So if I have 365 days, I probably don't want to have a tick mark for every single day. Maybe I just want to have 3 on the view, the beginning, the middle, and the end, just to kind of give some nice context there, but without adding a bunch of ink to the view itself to keep it very minimal. The last few I'll touch on just very briefly altogether. These ones are kind of self-explanatory. Label, if we drop and want to label the marks on our views, we can drop a measure or dimension into the label marks card. This is going to add a label to the view. Another great tip on label, if you click on the label card, it's going to open up a menu where you can encode, maybe you just want to encode the min and max on the view. You have the ability to encode those and kind of dial in those options by clicking on the label marks card once you've dropped something into the view there. Detail, this is where you're going to change the level of detail on the view. So let's say I have a scatter plot with sales on the y-axis and profit on the x-axis. If I wanted to look at customers on that scatter plot, I can simply drag a customer name into the details marks card, and it will change the level of detail in my view. So now I have the ability to look at all the customers by sales and profit. So another great one there. Tooltip. Tooltip is a great way to add context without adding a lot of data or a lot of ink to your view. Again, you want to keep everything very minimal. You don't want to label every single mark, especially if you have a ton of marks on the view. Tooltip is a great way to add those labels or add that context to the user without flooding the view with a bunch of stuff. So a tooltip, if you were to add something in there, you can just hover over the mark and it will display that information to the user in a nice tooltip. Another great tip on tooltips, you never want to go with the default. So say I had that sales and profit example on the scatter plot that I was using. By default, the tooltip will just read sales, comma, whatever the sales were for that mark, and then profit, comma, whatever the profit was for that mark. Typically, what I try to do is encode like a sentence that would make more sense to the end user. As an example, I might encode that with, on this day, this customer generated this many sales, which generated this much profit for the company. Something like that, something that's going to make a lot more sense to the end user so they can kind of digest that information a little bit easier. Angle is typically kind of paired with a pie chart. And I know there's a lot of conflicts of interest there with pie charts. People like them, people don't like them. We won't get into all that today, but what I wanted to touch on with angle is when you start getting into some of those more advanced chart types, angles where you're going to encode some of that curvature to the lines for say. So if you start to encode things like your sine and cosine, get into some of that stuff, you would drop that into angle. It's going to add some curvature and some aesthetics to the view that you can add there with angle. That brings us to the end of this layer. So I've added in color to my view here, and I've also added in some labels on my X and Y axes. So I've turned on that third layer. We can see it kind of come to life. The green would represent a positive close price to the prior day. A red would represent a negative close price versus that prior day. So the fourth layer is filtering. And this is where we can start slicing and dicing the data, kind of giving our end users the ability to look through and comb through the data themselves. So there's a lot of use cases for filtering. But what I want to focus on today is the different kinds of filters within Tableau. So Tableau has an order of operations that processes all of these things in a specific order, step by step. And there's actually multiple filters within that order of operations. So on the view here to the left side of the screen, you'll see that order of operations, and this is what's processed first. It's going to be at the very top, and processed last is at the very bottom. The first two filters is actually the very first thing that Tableau processes. It's the extract filter and a data source filter. To the right side of my screen, I have the data source tab if you're opening it from Tableau desktop. So we can see at the top right of that screenshot, there's an option that says filters and some font in blue that says add. If you would click add, you can add a a data source filter or extract filter to your view. And that's dependent on whether your connection is live versus extract. So you can see here, I'm working off a live connection currently within the screenshot. That would be a data source filter. If I were to change this to extract and then add some filters, that's an extract filter. The best use case for these kinds of filters at the very top level is, let's say I'm working with a very large data set, maybe 500 million rows, something like that. And I wanted to get that down to something a little bit more refined for my end user. say they only wanted to look at, one specific year or one segment of the product, I can add that filter at the very top level, and that's going to filter it down, say to like from 500 million to 1 million rows. And that's going to improve the performance of this dashboard. Because now since that's the very first thing that is processed in the order of operations, that filter is going to be applied before any of the calculations are kind of computed in the background. So now rather than applying those calculations to 500 million rows, we're only applying it to 1 million rows, which is going to improve the performance of the report overall. The next filter that's processed is called a context filter. In Tableau, when we drag things into the view, we call that a pill. So typically we're working with blue or green pills, which would represent discrete versus continuous measures and dimensions. Context filters are so important. They actually have their own encoding in Tableau. So if we look at my screenshot to the right, I have a context filter of category in the filter shelf, and it's encoded with a gray pill that would represent a context filter. Context filters are awesome. So not only are they processed up there with your data source and extract filters at the very top, so there is some opportunity again to get some more performance optimization out of individual sheets now. But it also has this cascading effect. So as an example, if we look at my screenshot, I have category as my context filter. I have subcategory, which is a dimension filter denoted in blue. That context filter is going to cascade down to my dimension filter. So as an example, let's say my use case was I wanted my dimension filter to be filtered and only show what was in or filtered for the categories. So if I filtered my category on technology, my subcategories, all of the dimensions or dimension members that would be available for that filter now would be filtered themselves to the technology category. So we would only see those subcategories that would fall under that main category within the context filter. So it has kind of this cascading effect down, which is a great, again, speed performance and kind of that unique user experience with that cascading effect. So context filters are extremely important. And the way that you would add a context filter to your view, if you add a dimension filter to the filter shelf, you can right click on that dimension filter and there'll be an option that says add to context. Doing that, simply it'll change that dimension filter to gray and most likely bring that to the very top of your filter shelf within the Tableau authoring interface there. So the next filters I'll touch on all at the same time. These are all going to be denoted with a blue pill. So they're essentially a dimension filter, but a condition filter and a top-in filter would be processed first through your order of operations here. So again, you would get some cascading effect if you had a top-in filter and a dimension filter applied to the same view. A condition filter is added. If you were to add a dimension to the filter shelf, you'll be presented with the screenshots to the right of the screen. So here you can see there's 4 tabs in that dialog box. We have general, wildcard, condition, and top. If I go to the condition tab and add a condition filter, that would be processed in condition filters. If I go to the top tab, that's a top-in filter, and I can add in some logic there to apply that filter. If I go to general, that's just going to be what we would typically see if we were to add a dimension filter. It's just going to have that checkbox where we could go through and check which dimension members we wanted to filter into the view or exclude from the view. Next that's processed is a measures filter. And again, a measure is going to be typically denoted with a green pill. We can see that I've added min sales to the filter shelf. So now we have 3 different types of filters in the filter shelf. I have a context filter, a dimension filter, and a measures filter. That measures filter is typically used as a use case. Let's say I wanted to filter only records in my data that had more than $10 in sales. I can add this min sales that says min 10, and it's going to filter out everything below $10 in sales. So all those records in our data set that generated $8 to $7, $9 in sales, those are going to be filtered out of my view now, it's only going to have $10 or more within the view. So that's how that would kind of work as a use case. The last filter that you can apply is called a table calculation filter. This is denoted very similar to our measures filter, but we'll see now within that green pill, which is the fourth in the filter shelf, it has a delta symbol to the right-hand side of it. That denotes that it's a table calculation. And a table calculation would be something like the percent of total, which is going to calculate across a view or down from a view, depending on how you have your data visualized within the authoring interface. But for the filter itself, it would work very similar to a measures filter. So say I wanted to filter out, if I was looking at the percent total, say I wanted to filter out everything below 25% total. So maybe I had 150 records in there. I wanted to zero it into maybe that top 20% that makes up that sales or profit. So I can filter out everything below that. So that's how a table calculation filter would work. And again, you would add that to the view, very similar to a measures filter. Simply drag it into the filter shelf, and you'll be presented with those options where you kind of refine what's being filtered in or out. The last thing I'll touch on for the fourth layer is called a subplot. So a subplot or subplotting is when you kind of add into your workbook two separate data visualizations that the user can then look at together and make decisions on. So here as an example, I have on the left-hand side, I've filtered that view to stock A. On the right-hand side, I have that filtered to stock B, and I can see them side by side for comparison. So now I can look back and forth and kind of make a decision. I see stock A is going down. Maybe I want to buy that now while it's on the downside in hopes that it's going to go up in the future. Then again, I see stock B is on the way up. Maybe I want to either wait till it plateaus or buy now in the hopes that it's going to continue to go up. So there, the user can kind of look at these and make a decision. So that's what a subplot or subplotting would be. So for the fourth layer, you can see I've toggled that on now. We have stock A filtered, and I've added that filter for the end user. So now they can kind of filter through themselves so they can kind of slice and dice the data and come up with decisions on their own. The fifth layer is statistics. And like I said, Tableau has kind of mastered all of this stuff up through now. Statistics, if you're in Tableau, there's actually two panes within Tableau. So in the authoring interface, you have the data pane and you have an analytics pane. The analytics pane would look like this, and it's going to present you with these options. So we can see there's three sections, one called summarize, another called model, and then custom. Within the analytics pane, you can simply toggle to it, and you can add these statistical models directly to your data. So Tableau's made it extremely easy to implement even some of these more advanced analytics into our tools. So I'll touch on some of these. I'll start with average line and the average line with 95% confidence interval. So if you were to add these to the view, you would simply click on them and drag them in, presented with this table to the right. This is where we're going to choose at what level of detail do we want that average line calculated at. So I can calculate the average across the entire table. I can calculate it at individual panes or individual cells of data. We also have the ability to add these reference lines to both columns and rows, or a column or row individually, so your X and Y axes. As a use case, let's say I had a scatter plot. I can add in an average line to both my column and rows, and now I have a scatter plot with a nice quadrant on it. So I can start making some analyses. For instance, if I had a bunch of customers kind of clustered down to the bottom left, I want to get those customers going up into that top right, especially if I have sales and profit on my scatter plot, if that's what I was viewing. So you can start generating that kind of analysis. Another great one to use as a use case is customer segmentation. So let's say I'm trying to kind of figure out, who's my best customers, how can I market to these individual customer segments? Adding these to a scatter plot would be another great example of a use case. The next one I'll touch on is the median with 95% confidence interval. I do use this often, especially in tandem with an average line. So if we're thinking of data, if our data was perfectly normalized, the mean the median, and the mode would all equal 0. So we'd have a perfect normalized data that would follow a nice bell curve shape. If our data had any kind of outliers or was skewed either left or right, our average and median would kind of be offset from one another. So the higher the outliers are in your data, the bigger the difference between those two measures. So adding an average line and a median line can kind of give you a very quick glance at how far off that those two measures are from each other. So you can kind of start to realize, well, where do I have outliers? How can I take care of those? That kind of stuff. So another great use case there. Next one I'll touch on is trend lines. This is where we can start getting into some more advanced analytics when we add in these trend lines. So we can see Tableau has kind of presented us with 5 different kinds of trend lines that we can add to our view. And what I love about this and what Tableau has done here is they've made it really easy, even for non-statistical people, to kind of understand how these things would be used and the use case that would be applied to them. So for instance, they've given us these nice visuals down here where we can see if I was adding a linear trend line, that's probably going to work best if my data follows kind of a linear direction. So going from maybe bottom left to top right, that's when I would use a linear trend line. But we can also see, for example, the polynomial line. If my data kind of has ups and downs, maybe that polynomial trend line would be a more exact or more accurate model to drop into our data. So we can see kind of from that non-statistical aspect, Tableau has done a pretty good job of kind of guiding the user through that selection and making the right choice here. But if you're more statistical savvy, they've taken it a step further as well. Once you've added those things to your view, you can simply right-click on the trend line that's being added, and you can then view the summary statistics. You can get informations like your p-value or maybe your coefficients. If you wanted to work that thing into, or those coefficients into your analysis, start making inferences or maybe even some predictive modeling, you can then do that directly from within Tableau. It's a really easy way to add in these things. We can also then test the differences between these trend lines. So if I drop in a linear trend line, I can then immediately just drop in a polynomial with no code at all, and I can start to view the differences between those two models to kind of make a decision on which one best represents my data. The next one I'll touch on is forecast. And within Tableau, they actually are using a model called exponential smoothing. That's the forecasting model that they're using within the tool itself. What I love about forecasting, again, even for non-statistical people, if you add a forecast into your view and there's just not enough data to calculate out that forecast, what you're going to end up with is an average line with a 95% confidence band over it. And this is a great way for even non-statistical people to kind of go in and say, okay, maybe I don't have enough data here, something doesn't look right. Let's get our data into a more granular level and see if that improves our forecast. So maybe instead of using year, maybe let's use month or week. So Tableau can pick up on those seasonality and those trends and create that forecast and get something more accurate. Again, for more statistical savvy folks, if you right click on your forecast, you have the ability to kind of manipulate some of those underlying parameters. You can also view some summary statistics like your AIC and things like that. So you can start to, again, kind of diagnose your forecast and see what's going on under the hood. The next model is clustering, and this is the last one I'll touch on here. Clustering is great, and within Tableau, they use, the technique they use is k-means. So that's the model that's being implemented in the background. And again, you can simply just click on your cluster and you can change some of those parameters. So you can change how many clusters are displayed within the view. You can view some of those summary statistics. And as a use case, I mentioned customer segmentation earlier, but adding in a cluster to your view is a great way to segment out your customers. And maybe you're trying to figure out different ways to market to certain individuals. This is a very simple model that you can implement. Because it's displayed visually, you can then take that to, maybe a C-suite individual and kind of present your use case with it. So again, it's a great way to add value and context to the user, and very simple to implement within Tableau. So that's everything within the analytics pane. And there's even some more that I didn't touch on there. But again, Tableau is such a flexible tool and it's very robust. it allows you to make these external connections. So if we wanted to do some more advanced statistics within our data, we do have the ability to do that. From the top navigation, if you click on help, you'll be presented with a menu that looks like this. I did take this screenshot in a couple versions prior to this latest one, so I think it's changed slightly, but this should still follow kind of the same steps. Excuse me. You would click on help, the top nav, go to settings and performance, and then go to manage analytics extension connection. That'll open up a menu to connect to R or Python within Tableau. So now you have the ability to connect the data within Tableau from all of these data sources that they kind of give you. You can take those measures and dimensions and write R or Python directly within Tableau. It's going to pass that off to, say, an R server. It's going to process all that, and it's going to bring in some attributes for you to take advantage of. What I love and what's so powerful about this is, for instance, if I were doing some sort of advanced regression, I can then take all my data out of Tableau. It's going to process it here, and it's going to return those coefficients. So now I can use those coefficients as actual measures within my data set. So I can return that coefficient into a calculated field and drag that into my view for my analysis. So some really powerful stuff you can do here, and it's a really easy thing to set up. So I've turned on that fifth layer, that's that statistics layer. I can see now I've added a trend line and some forecasting to our stock data here. So we can kind of see that stuff come to life. The sixth layer that I'll touch on is theme. And of all the layers I just mentioned, Tableau does a fantastic job of making it very easy for the user and guiding them through those processes. But theme is where Tableau just struggles and I think has failed. Adding in simple design elements like maybe curvature around your containers or some drop shadowing to add some depth. Those simple design elements, Tableau does not implement natively. So it doesn't work very well if you're just trying to implement those things in Tableau. There's different ways you can get around it for sure, but it doesn't kind of give you that end result that's going to drive that professional polish or add in all that credibility that you can gain through adding a nice architecture around your data. So what I've always done is I've looked to outside tools to kind of create those design elements and then incorporate them into Tableau or export them out of those and import them into Tableau. So there's two different softwares that I would recommend. One is Figma, which would be the logo to the left. And I need to add some labels here. Sorry about that. Figma is a free tool that you can find online. So if you just go to figma.com, you can create an account and start using graphic design or start building out some of those elements directly from Figma. Excuse me. The other one that I've used is Adobe XD. And if you download the Adobe Creative Suite, it's actually a subscription tool. So you have to subscribe and it is a paid subscription. Excuse me. What I love about Adobe XD is because you're buying into that Creative Suite, you also get access to other tools. So you get things like Photoshop and stuff like that you can really start using and incorporating within your tool. Again, though, Figma is free. That's what I typically lean on the most. I wouldn't consider myself a graphic design person by any means, but I am dangerous enough to kind of get in there and build out my own design elements. So you can see here, I've toggled on that sixth layer and I've added a nice architecture around. And this is going to provide that professional polish. And doing so is going to drive adoption of your tools. So you can see I have some drop shadowing. It's going to add some depth into here. I've added a header across the top and as well as some labels on my toggles. So I'm going to open this up. I call this taking away the layers, but I built this kind of supplementary workbook where we can come through here and toggle these on and off, and we can see how those affect one another. So I've published this to Tableau Public. So if you guys want to get in here and play around with it, feel free. But I can do things like I can toggle off the theme. So we can see by losing that architecture, I kind of lose that added credibility that I could have gained by adding in some of those simple design elements. I can also do things like toggle off the aesthetics. And notice if I do so, it does have some effect on some of those other layers. So if I toggle off color, I'm actually toggling off statistics as well. I've lost my forecast. My trend line stays, but I have lost my forecast. Forecast, if you add that to the view, that is a color attribute. So by turning off those aesthetics, I lose that. Same thing with filters. So if I toggle off my filters, I no longer have the ability to filter through and kind of slice and dice the data. So I kind of lost that ability to do so. And my end user now suffers from that. So feel free to download this. You can download the workbook and kind of get in there if you wanted to play around with how I've implemented those toggles. All that logic is in there. So feel free to download it and use it as much as you want. I'm gonna hop back in here, and I'm not even gonna go to presentation mode, but there's a few things I wanted to touch on before I close. One is other resources, and one of those resources that I'd recommend is Tableau Public as a whole. When I first got started in the community, I was very nervous and skeptical about publishing my work onto Tableau Public in a public platform. I didn't want people criticizing my work or looking through it. It made me very uncomfortable in the beginning. But what I did is I utilized Tableau Public to kind of go in and draw inspiration, download other folks' workbooks, re-engineer what they did, and it kind of helped me build up my skills and confidence within Tableau to then get enough confidence to start publishing my own stuff. Another thing that I absolutely love about Tableau Public that's often overlooked, it's one of the world's largest data repositories. So there's folks out there that are very passionate about things, and they're going to download data or create their own data sets. And when they publish their workbook, that data is now available. If you download their workbook, if they give you the ability to download it, that is, you can download their workbook, you have access to their data. Maybe you want to reach out to that author before you republish what they've kind of put together. But you do have the ability to do that. So if you're very passionate about comic books, you can search comic books on Tableau Public, and I guarantee you'll find a data set for it. Some other resources, I'll touch on what we offer at Playford Data. So we do offer a virtual flagship training. We have one coming up in the fall. It's going to be very similar to this presentation, but it's over 4 days, and there's a ton of more content. And that is presented by Ryan Sleeper, he's author of 3 different books, very active in the Tableau community, very knowledgeable. So he'll be leading that flagship training. Also, we have our playforddata.com/blog. So on our blog, we publish blogs all the time. We just published one on Tuesday. So I think we do one at least once a week, if not more than that. So definitely check out our blog. It's a free resource. Guarantee you, if you've run into a problem, we've also run into that exact same problem and blogged about it. So if you run into issues, check our blog out. We probably have a good solution for you. Another one is our Playford Data TV. So our TV platform is over 25 plus hours now of recorded content. And these are going to be things like chart types, tactical things you can implement in Tableau, very strategic things that are just around data themselves, maybe things like getting to know your audience. All of these would be available from our Playford Data TV platform. Last is our consulting. So we are a consulting group. If you guys were looking to work with us, definitely let us know. You can go to our website and contact us form is right there. It's very simple and easy to get into contact with us. And we would love to come and help you guys out with anything that you're wanting to work with us on. Some other resources, and I'll briefly touch on these. Best of Web Tableau, fantastic. They actually consolidate a ton of different blogs and blog posts from the prior month, and they present that to you within their newsletter. So that's published by Tableau on Tableau's website. Another thing is the Data Fam Roundup. That is a weekly newsletter that goes out. Very similar. They kind of monitor all these different blogs for you, and they're going to kind of bubble up to the top, very interesting ones and ones that Tableau's kind of found useful. Another blog that I absolutely love and follow is the Flairledge Twins blog. A lot of great content on there, and they also post templates and things like that. So if you're looking to get into some more advanced chart types, if you go to their blog, they might have a template for you where you can download like an Excel sheet, plug in your own data, and now you have this really fancy advanced chart type that was very easy to implement because they've kind of done a lot of the work for you. That was a ton of content. I do want to stop there. I'll present my contact information here. So if you wanted to reach out to me, if you had questions or concerns, here's my email address, ethan@playforddata.com. get in touch with me on Twitter. My handle is @visuallang. And then my LinkedIn is just the LinkedIn domain, Ethan-Lang. So if you want to connect with me there, definitely feel free. But I'll open it up to any questions anyone had throughout.
That was so great, Ethan. I think we had a few questions around, sorry, I'm scrolling all the way up through the questions. So we had some questions around context filters. So one of them was, how do they affect LODs? Can you talk a little bit about how LODs and context filters and some of the other filter types interact?
Yeah, let me quickly pull that slide back up, because LODs are actually within that order of operations. Let me share my screen again real quick. So if you notice here, we have context filters are processed here, and then a fixed LOD would be processed. So within your LODs, there's 3 types of level of detail calculation. That's what LOD stands for. And those are processed at different levels. So fixed LODs are processed. That's the first LOD that's processed, but it's processed before a context filter. So if you add a fixed LOD, trying to think of a good example. A fixed LOD would be like sales. So let's say I fixed sales. If I brought in a date dimension across my columns, I've fixed sales to no specific date. So it's just going to sum up all the sales in my data set, no matter what date is displayed. So that's kind of an example of a fixed LOD, but that's processed before a context filter, or excuse me, after the context filter is processed. So if I added a date to context and filtered on, say, the first year of data, that would be processed, and then my fixed LOD. So now that sales aggregation would then get affected by that context filter. Then after all of that, then you have your exclude and include level of detail calculations. Those are going to be processed after context filters, after your fixed LODs, condition filters, top-in filters, and dimension filters. So if you have any of those other filters, your exclude and include LODs would be affected by that. I know that was a long-winded answer, but I hope it helps. LODs are pretty advanced calculations. So if you do have any other questions about that, we have a blog on it. I'm also willing to, if you want to email me a specific question or use case, I'm willing to help out with anything you have going on with LODs.
That's great, Ethan. So we are running short on time. So we are going to go ahead and move on. There are still more questions in the chat. So I welcome you to go through that whole list. There's also a whole bunch of accolades for you. This presentation was really great. So thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
Totally, absolutely. Yeah, I'll peruse through the chat here, and I'll try to answer those questions as we move on.
Awesome, thank you. So moving on, Ginny and I are going to tell you all about calculations. You guys probably know us. We're here every month, so we're not going to do too much in terms of introductions. But I did want to tell you a little bit about National Limerick Day. So I've written this limerick. It is completely awful. This is why I don't write for a living. But in case you didn't know, it's the National Day of the Limerick and the end of National Nurses Week after a lady who provided insight on the sick. A statistics teacher before being a nurse, Florence Nightingale used data visualizations for a cause. She highlighted preventable infections that led to unnecessary deaths, and about the lack of sanitation measures gave people pause. So ponder that history while we dig into calculations. And in the process, we'll hope you'll learn a sick Tableau trick. There we go. This is why they don't pay me for writing poems. All right, Ginny, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
I sure will.
All right, so we're gonna give you guys an introduction to some calculations. So Ethan talked a lot about calculations, but if a lot of that went over your head, we're gonna go all the way back down to sort of the really basics. So let's talk again about dimensions and measures. So Ginny, can you hide the format workbook tab so we can see the data pane?
Oh yes, sorry.
No problem. All right. So we have a data source here. We're going to look at the data pane first, just to talk a little bit about dimensions and measures. Ethan mentioned them in his presentation. If you remember, dimensions are qualitative fields like names and departments and semesters. You can think of them sort of as categories, while measures are quantitative. They're things that you can count or sum or aggregate in some way. And by default, Tableau will aggregate them when you actually put them on a view. So in this data set on the left, you'll see that we have 5 measures. Those are the things that are below that middle gray line. The first one is a calculation, and you can tell that it's a calculation by the presence of that little equal sign to the left of it. You'll also see on the right of it that there's this big red exclamation point, and that is something that every single one of us will see at least once in our Tableau lives. That means there's an error with this calculation. If you have never seen this error, I want to meet you, because I want to know how you've somehow magically, mastered all calculations. So we'll get to that error in a little while. But moving on, we have 2 other calculations that come from the data source, that invoice total and row that are right below it. Those come straight from the data source. And then below that are 2 that are in italics. So journals, count, and measure values. Those are fields that Tableau has automatically generated. So let's look at the actual data. So if you click the little view data button that's right next to that filter icon, you'll actually be able to see the data that is in the data source. So that first column, journal status, if you look at the ABC above it, you'll see that that also has an equal sign. So that's a dimension, but it's calculated field dimension. The next field is journal name, and that's just a string that is in the data source, and journal status, same thing. It's a string that comes straight from the data source. The last 2 columns there are invoice total and invoice row. Those are our measures, the measures that are in the data source. But what you haven't seen here is journals, or the journals count field, measure values, or measure names. Measure names goes along with measure values, and it's another one of those Tableau generated fields. So right now on the field, so if we go ahead and close this view data window, we'll see right now we have journal status original on the view. If you double click measure values, and this is the magic of measure values, when you double click it, it's gonna add, oopsies. Somehow we do this every time we practice this. We've gotten it to do this wrong. So when you double click measure values, normally what will happen is measure values and measure names will be added to the view. So measure values on text and measure names in columns or rows, depending on where your data is. So you'll see that there are 3 measures showing now. There's count of journals, there's the invoice total, and then there's row. So count of journals makes sense. It's a counter of every row that's in the data set. So there's 2 rows for each of those different statuses. The invoice total is the sum of the invoice total across all of the values that share that journal status. And then we've got row, and row is a little weird here. So row number in our original data source was actually a row, kind of like a row count field, so a row numbering field. So it was a row 1, row 2, all the way down to row 6. So what has happened here is that Tableau, when it interpreted your data, said, hey, this is a number, and because it's a number, it's a measure. That's not exactly what we want here. So you'll see this happen often with things like term codes, with IDs, student IDs, especially if they don't have any any letters in them. And we can easily correct this. So if you look in the data pane there, if you just click and drag row up to the top there, you'll see it becomes a dimension. So now again, it's a categorizing field, it's qualitative data, and Tableau automatically removes it from the view. And now if we try to add that back into the view just by double clicking or by clicking and dragging it onto rows, we'll see it actually, again, it's categorizing everything in the data set instead of being an aggregated measure. So that is dimensions versus measures sort of deep dive. If you want to go ahead and go on to left, right?
Sure thing. So left and right are string calculations that cannot be used with numbers unless you first convert them to a string. We're going to do that in a minute. Here we have a list of fall term codes. So Tableau saw this list and it thought, hey, those are numbers. I'm going to categorize them as a measure and treat them as a number. But we know that that's not actually the case. That's not generally how we use them. We use them as a dimension and as a string. So we're going to convert that. And it's really easy to do. You just click on the number sign next to term code and you go down to string. and that does it for us. So we are going to use the term code with some string calculations now. So you'll notice that each term code follows the same pattern. The first 4 digits are the year, and the last 2 digits are the semester. So we want to isolate the year and the semester using left and right. So first we're going to calculate the year. Now you'll notice at the beginning of this calculation, I have some text in gray and it's offset by a double slash before each line. These are comments, and comments are really helpful to add because it helps us document what the calculation is for, what it's supposed to be doing. And if somebody else inherits your dashboard later on, everybody will be on the same page. So like I said, we're going to take the calculation left and use it to isolate the year from term code. So that's a very simple calc. You start with left, open parentheses, the field that you are looking at, which is term code, followed by a comma, and the number 4, because we want the first 4 characters from the left, close parenthesis. So now we're going to add that to our viz, and we see that indeed left is getting us the 4 digits that make up the year. Next, we're going to isolate the semester. We're going to use the opposite. We're going to use right because we want the right 2 numbers. Then the term code, comma 2. We're going to add that to our view. So we see we're getting the correct numbers here, 2022 40. Now, most people may not know that 40 stands for fall and 10 stands for spring. So we're going to right click on semester, go to aliases, and we're going to fix those so that people can understand what they mean. So for 10, I'm going to alias it spring, and for 40, I'm going to alias it fall. Hit OK, and we see that changes in our view. Now, if I wanted to control click and select both of these and add them to our text box, I could go into text and put them on the same row so that it reads in plain English like we are used to seeing fall 22, spring 22, etc. That's it for left and right, and Roshni is going to show you how to do mid.
All right, so sometimes when you just display a year, it's not really clear what kind of year is it. Is it an academic year or is it a fiscal year? So in our example, let's say that fiscal years run July to June and academic years run January to December. So how do we define, hey, or let people know, hey, we're talking about an academic year? One easy way is just to add the AY at the beginning of the field, and we can do that really easily in a calculation. But let's say we don't have room for the AY. We're putting this on a chart. We need those labels. Well, that's where we can think about, okay, what if we just shorten the year? So we're going to start with that first case where it's AY and then the year. And here we've just taken the AY prefix, just put it in quotes and added a plus, and then we're following it up with left and term code 4. So that's the the leftmost digits of the term code preceded by the letters AY. So again, let's say we don't have room for that. One thing that we can do is we can just take out the century. So instead of 2022, it's just AY 22, AY 21, AY 20, etc. And the way we can do that is to take that year and just take the last 2 digits of that. And so that's what Ginny's about to comment out here. So we add in the right and we take the right 2 digits of the year, and then we have AY 22, just like we want. Putting both right and left together is a little bit of extra work, right? There's a couple of steps to that process. And so there is this magical formula called mid, which basically says, I'm going to take the middle of the string. So Ginny, if you could click the little arrow button on the right side of the screen. So what you'll see here, whoops, there we go, is Tableau actually has this helper text for different calculations. So if you either search for mid, or if you actually click on just the middle of the word mid that we have in our code there, it'll tell you how to use this field. So for mid, we're going to take the term that we want to take the middle of, so mid term code. And then we say we want to start at the 3rd character, so that's the 3, and take that character plus the next one, or take 2 characters in the middle of the string. So one thing you might be used to in some programming languages, the position of where you start actually starts at 0. The first character is position number 0. In others, it's position number 1. Tableau here says the first character is position number 1. We're gonna be, you know, intuitive and logical and like think how people actually think. First character is the first position. So here again, we're just starting at position 3, we're taking the third and fourth positions. So now if we go ahead and add that to the fields, you see that's a little bit easier than that nested function that we had where we took left and right, but we get the exact same results there. So we see AY22 for the 2022 years, AY21 for the next ones, and all the way down. So that's mid.
So next we're going to look at string or str and integer int. So string is used to change numbers into string value, and int or integer is used to change strings into an integer value. So we're looking at our term codes again. And in my last example, we converted this to a string, but sometimes we actually want to use it as a number and do mathematical equations with the term code. And therefore we need them to be an integer. So for instance, the fall terms are always 100 apart. And what if we want to know the term code for the next fall? So we can actually change this back to an integer using a calculation and use that to add 100 and get the next fall term code. So it's a very simple calculation. It's int because we want to change it to an integer, followed by an open parentheses, the field, close parentheses, and then you can do whatever mathematical function that you want. You can add 100, you could subtract 100, get the previous fall, whichever one it is. So then we're going to put this into our viz, and you can see here that Tableau is indeed treating this as an integer now. We have that comma setting apart the numbers. All right, so now that we have our next fall term as an integer, what if we want to change it back to a string and have it read fall 2022, fall 2021, like in our last example? We can do that by changing this field back to a string. So we're going to do this by building a nested calculation. If you don't know how to do a nested calculation all at once, then just do one piece at a time. So we know that we want to change the calculation we just wrote back to a string. And then we're going to take the left 4 characters again to get the year. So we're going to take left, and we want to take the left of this whole field here and 4 characters and close parenthesis. And then we're going to hit apply. And we're going to add that to our view so we can see that it is indeed giving us the first 4 of this new field that we just created. So 2019 is the next fall term after 2018. So we want it to say fall prior to that, because these are all fall terms. So we can add that string just in quotations. We'll type fall, close quotations, followed by a plus sign. And then we'll add that before our year. So now we have fall 2019 through fall 23. These are all squished together though, and that's because we did not put a space in here. Now you could add quotation space, quotation plus, or you could just simply go in here and put a space before the in quotation and fall, and that will give you the space between your fall and your year. That's it for string and integer.
So what if, like in our case, we actually have information about what the semesters are, and we don't want to use aliases like we did before, but we actually want to use an existing field that we have, term name, to get the semester name, whether it's fall, spring, or summer. We can do that with the len calculation. So len is a string calculation, and unlike most of the other calcs we've seen so far, instead of giving you another string as its output, it gives you a number. And this number it's generally something you're not going to use on its own, or you're not going to display it on its own. But what you might do is use it in other calculations. And that's exactly how we're going to use it now. So let's go ahead and look at the len, the term name. So calculation number 5 there. So len is really simple. You take len for length, and in the parentheses, you put the field that you want to find the length of. So in this case, len term name. And let's go ahead and add that to our view. And so we can see, again, that's when Ginny double clicked on it, it automatically saw that as a number, and it added it to measures, or added it as a measure. And you can see that we have varying lengths depending on which semester. So fall terms are 9 digits, or nine characters long. Spring ones are 11, and then summer ones alternate between 13 and 14, depending on whether it's summer 1 or summer 2. So how do we want to use this? We want to use this to get just the semester part. So just not the year, ignore the year. We want just that first part outside of the year and the space behind it. So we're going to do a calculation using this length field that we just created. So we want the leftmost part of that string minus the length of the string minus 5, right? So we're going to take left of the term name. So again, we're starting at the beginning of the field, and then we're going to calculate, depending on whichever term it is, the full length of that field minus 5. So len of term name, we calculated minus 5. And there's a few different ways. So let's go ahead and add that actually to the field. And there we have it. We have fall, spring, summer 1, summer 2. And there's a few different ways that you could do this. You could, instead of actually doing the term minus 5, you can actually put in an example here. So we have in comments, we have that left term name, same thing. And instead of minus 5, we're going to actually take the length of a string that we know to be the same length. We could have even put in the len of the string of the year if we wanted to really string these things together. And one other way of doing that, and actually that's what we do in the last example that's in a block comment. So Ginny mentioned earlier, 2 slashes is a regular comment. Block comments are a relatively new feature to Tableau. I think they were introduced sometime in version 2020, but it's just like a comment that you might see in SQL. It's a slash followed by an asterisk to start the comment, and then an asterisk followed by a slash to end the comment. And anything between those 2 symbols is going to be commented out. So we're just going to, we're not going to actually uncomment this, but basically what we've done in this string here is we've taken the left part of term name and taken all the characters for the difference between the term name's length and the length of the year plus 1, because we gotta add 1 for the space. And so this string, regardless of which of those 3 different ways of using length, we're always going to come up with the same set of results. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch of more tabs in this workbook. We so do not have time for them because we planned very poorly on time. But don't fret, we will be back at a future HE Tug to talk about other calculations. So stay tuned, and we will be sharing this presentation on the HE Tug Tableau Public sometime after we get the tabs we haven't covered out of it. So if I see that there are some questions in the chat, I'm going to see if there's any that we can answer really quickly. So yeah, so Krista asked about is using these left and right and some of these other calcs a good way to do meaningful analysis on language, like 20/FA for a term. It can be. You can always split up the 20. I assume that's the year, and the FA, I assume that's the semester. So yeah, you can use these fields to sort of group your semesters into fall and whatever year. So yeah. So we are gonna get going. Let me share the correct screen now. And wrap up with some things that are coming up in the future. In the very near future, we've got Tableau Conference. So if you haven't registered already, Tableau Conference is happening next week, May 17th and through 19th if you're in person, May 17th and 18th if you're virtual. And if you just go to tableau.com/conference, you can go ahead and register for free. So we just put a poll up there. So who is going to Tableau Conference? Who's going virtually? Who's going in person? I'm also shocked that we still have 200 people on the call. Just letting you guys know, this is insane for almost 5 p.m. on the East Coast. So it looks like most people are going virtually. There's a lucky handful. Hold on, I'm gonna end the poll in like 10 seconds. Got 10 more seconds. Let's see if we can actually get 150 out of 199 people we got 150. Yay! You guys are still answering this poll. This is amazing. All right, I'm gonna share the results in just a second. I swear I am. All right, there's still people voting. Come on, guys. All right, so most people are attending virtually. We've got a lucky 8 who are going in person. And about 25 who are looking at potentially attending next time. I'm gonna share the results now. Hopefully you guys see that. Well, the good news is, even if you can't go this time, they will probably have recordings up for many of the sessions. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip. And Jenny, if you wanna talk about what some of those sessions are.
Sure, so we've got different tracks, and some of these are analytics for everyone, customer 360 analysis, the Tableau economy, data culture, and data fabric. So you can read a little bit about what types of sessions are included under each of these tracks. And if you go into the schedule builder, which we can throw a link in for in a minute, it'll only show you the content appropriate for you depending on whether you're attending virtually or in person. So that should really help build out your schedule for the conference.
Sorry, I'm pasting links as fast as I can. So some of the cool things that are going to be happening both virtually and in person are Iron Viz. If you've ever heard of Iron Chef, Iron Viz is the visualization version of that. Ginny just posted a whole bunch of links, including a very special shout out, because Ginny got asked by the Tableau folks to put together a Viz for Iron Viz. So check out her chicken or egg Iron Viz edition to see which came first. So keynotes and devs on stage. The keynotes are usually really great. The opening one is being combined with devs on stage this time. So what that devs on stage piece is probably the part that I like the most out of all of these keynotes. And it's an opportunity for the actual developers, the Tableau developers, to tell us about what they're working on and what might be coming up next. Tableau Doctor is another great thing to take advantage of. It is free. See the question in the chat right now. You do have to register to get a time slot, and go do it now if those times are available. But basically you have some period of time one-on-one with a Tableau doctor. So that's usually someone who's an expert in the field, someone from the data fam community, who can help you sort of troubleshoot whatever's wrong or happening with your workbook that you want to get a better understanding of. And it's a great resource, but time slots do fill up really quickly. So get on that now.
So some other ways that you can participate are to join the Tableau Slack group, which we can put the link to in the chat, and the Viz Gallery.
I think sorry, for the Slack, you actually will get an invite after you register. So.
Oh, okay. I guess I registered so early on, I didn't actually know that. All right, so the Viz Gallery is an awesome feature that they have been doing virtually for the last few years, where they hand select some of the best Vizes from the community over the past year and display them in a virtual gallery. That goes live on May 16th, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, they're doing live streams and broadcasts of Data Plus Women, Data Plus Diversity, community chats, and the roving reporters who go around the conference and make you feel like you're actually kind of there. Just a little.
So there's a whole bunch of sessions that are being offered. These are some of the ones that Tableau has highlighted. I'm really looking forward to the Tableau Speed Tips Beginner. If you liked our calculations and are willing to, like, I don't know, take some caffeine beforehand, just so you can get sort of a little bit speedier in your brain, the speed tips are amazing. There's a couple of different speed tip sessions, one on the first day with Annabelle and Heidi, who are both part of, I think they're both part of Data Plus Women as well. And on the second day, Lorna Brown, who has the most delightful accent, I think she's from Manchester, and Ann Jackson. I think all of these folks are Tableau visionaries, but there's a whole bunch of other cool things like building accessible dashboards and all sorts of cool stuff. So check out the session catalog. Ginny just posted a link to the session catalog, registration, and a whole bunch of other stuff in there, including you're going to see some Tableau Public visits going up now that the schedule is actually out there. And there's a couple of really great schedule pickers that let you put in your role, what industry you're in and stuff like that. And then it spits out some recommendations. So I highly recommend that you check those out. Ginny, if you want to take this last one.
Sure. So if you're attending virtually, they are setting up a lot of different networking events on Remo. And the link is right here. I think Rochi's going to put that in the chat.
Yep.
I believe they are having one for all of the major keynotes for IronViz and just some general networking opportunities. If you've never used Remo before, it's an interactive kind of site where you can go in. They have different tables where you can create a round table, and they are generally assigned topics for each table. So find a topic you're interested in, double click and join that table. There sometimes, if there are enough people, are multiple floors even. So just make sure you go in and you explore and find a group that you want to join and get to know some new people.
And just a couple of highlights, we are hoping to have some HE-Tug tables at some of the American time zone hangouts. And for those of you who are Spanish speakers, there with the American IronViz schedule, there's also going to be a separate Spanish IronViz hangout by the Comunidades. I'm probably butchering that. This is another reason why I don't talk. So those are going to be kind of awesome. And hold on. There's also some fun stuff like a photo booth, and you can hype Tableau conference all over social using the hashtag data22. For those of you on social, not for me.
Sorry, can I make an announcement too? This is
Sure.
Roy from Stern, if you don't mind, about a Tableau in-person event for higher education.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so just wanted to let you know that I put this in the chat, but there are going to be some of us in person, and we've been able to work with the Tableau Enterprise Education rep there for a reception on Wednesday. So if you're interested in joining us, I put my email there. Let me know. I'm happy to extend the invite to you if you're interested in joining us Wednesday night.
All right, great. Thanks, Roy. And now we wrap up.
I know we've been throwing a lot of links in the chat box, but just bear with us while I put a few more. We always want to know what you thought about today's meeting. So there is a form that you can fill out and let us know. If you want to present at a future meeting, we also have a form for that. And we are actively looking for presenters for the summer and fall. So even if you're not ready to do it quite yet, go ahead and fill out the form and let us know. We'll get you on the books for, later on this year. The Tableau conference registration link is up. Analytics Day, if you haven't already registered, I can't tell you enough how much fun it's going to be. So go ahead and register for that. It's free. It does last all day, but you can kind of come and go as you please. And then, of course, our HE-Tug registration page for June is up. We are going to have Meet a Community member Lydia Scholl-Cotton. You might remember her from a couple months ago, presentation. The tips and tricks, that will probably be more calculations. And then Anna is going to show us her visit of the day, Don't Pass on the Grub. And that is going to be just awesome. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet, but it's phenomenal. And of course, our important links for our site, our email, our Slack channel, our forums, and our forum, and our Tableau Public page, where we are going to post our calculations workbook once it is ready to go.
And we'll also be sending out the recording via Slack. And if I get my act together, I'll actually remember to send out the email. It'll also be posted on the May 2022 HE-Tug site. So the same place that you registered, we'll post the YouTube video on there again sometime probably next week. So that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for sticking with us.